Thank you very much. This is Scott Sklar, and I'm moderating this panel. Again, I'm president of the Stella Group and an adjunct professor at George Washington University, teaching 3 interdisciplinary courses on sustainable energy. And I ran the Solar Energy Industries Association for 15 years and worked in the US Senate for 10. And I really selected the presenters on this panel because the whole focus of this panel today is how do we articulate our message and how do we interact with policymakers. And these 2 women are very dynamic professionals sitting here in Washington in actually related nonprofits. But I actually think they are some of the best articulators I know. And they actually sort of come at it from a slightly different perspective, which was also what I wanted. So, and so I want to start this off and make it a little controversial, maybe, just to get everybody ready just before our 2 great presenters present. I am underwhelmed half the time on how many of us in our community articulate our positions. And I spent a lot of time when I was running SEIA, I say this in a nonviolent way, whacking my members so they wouldn't say certain things. So I'm going to just throw this out here for a 2-minute thing, and then I will ask Lynn to start the presentations. But the one thing is, do not say what they think or what they articulate is stupid. You know, that's like saying, you know, your mother's ugly or your child's ugly. You don't start that way. You don't win hearts and minds. I generally don't like you even bad-mouthing other technologies, even the ones that we don't particularly like, right? Is that, and particularly among the family, I sometimes in our meetings today and are incredulous that somebody in the clean energy community would knock, oh, energy efficiency doesn't that much, or some of the renewable tech. I immediately intervene and say it's just not true. So, you know, lay out what you're trying to lay out without saying something negative at someone else's expense. And I guess the last thing is, and Steve Nadell at the ACEEE in the last panel sort of raised this, is look at where who you're trying to convince is from. If they're from a rural community or an urban community or a coal and oil community or an industrial community or an agricultural community, they have different priorities. They all don't have the same priorities. And so try to think about or read about before you meet them what they're going through. And then try to have some empathy about what they're going through and see how what we are presenting are practical solutions to what they do. So I'm just throwing those 3 things sort of always have bothered me. And that's actually the kinds of things I want from the questions and presentations of our 2 great presenters. So, you know, so that's I just wanted to raise that. So Lynn Abramson is executive director of the Clean Energy Business Network. She's going to tell you what it is, but she is extremely dynamic in predominantly getting a small business, US-based set of companies activated on this agenda. And she is amazing, even without a beard. It's unbelievable to me. So Lynn, take it away, please.
Okay, will do. Thank you. And I think, Scott, let's see if we can maximize my screen here.
And yeah, you're unbelievable.
Yep. Do you see you got it?
You know, for somebody who isn't drinking bourbon at the moment, you're just amazing. Look at this.
Great. And so you can see me, you can hear me, and you can see my slide deck perfectly, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that intro and those comments, Scott. And frankly, I would say actually a lot of what you said is part of the message that I want to convey today. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for grassroots or grass tops lobbying And then Ruth is going to talk a little bit of, from a different angle about engaging with policymakers. But the message here is really, how do you make your voice heard? So whether you're talking to federal lawmakers, state lawmakers, or the public, how do you communicate effectively with those audiences? I'm going to start with a little bit of background on my organization and then a little bit of background on me personally and the perspective with which I'm bringing these comments today. My organization is the Clean Energy Business Network, which serves as the small business voice for the clean energy economy. And we work to enhance opportunities for clean energy technology and service providers, primarily from small and mid-sized companies or various partners doing business with them. And we work in three primary mission areas. The first is policy support, informing and engaging business leaders in policy issues impacting their industry. The second is market and technology education, working both internally facing to promote dialogue within the industry, but also externally facing to promote this development assistance, mainly in the form of promoting industry collaboration and aggregating useful information and opportunities for exposure. We have grown to a record high of more than 4,200 business leaders across all 50 U.S. states and about 350 congressional districts. And that includes more than 60 members who subscribe to our premium online business development resources and staff introductions. And as you can see here, solar is our #1 technology in the network, but we have very diverse technology. So some of what Scott was saying before about kind of working with allies in the industry, I definitely subscribe to that belief. So you can see very diverse range of technologies represented in our network. So now I want to step back from the organization as a whole and give you a little bit of my personal background because I think it's relevant to the perspective that I'm bringing to the table in this conversation today. So I actually started my career in science, doing a PhD in marine and atmospheric sciences at Stony Brook University. And my area of focus was on carbon cycling in the ocean. So I was very much researching natural processes that impacted the ability for the ocean to act as a sink for greenhouse gases, was studying all the latest climate science, and really believed in, the drastic need to mitigate climate change and take swift action. And I became interested in policy because I wanted to become part of the solution, not just studying the problem, but also advocating or developing policy solutions to the problem. So I was lucky enough to be brought to Washington, D.C. through a fellowship program and ended up working with the Office of Senator Barbara Boxer for 5.5 years. Obviously, she was quite a leader on climate action. But one of the interesting things that happened in the process of working for one of the most liberal senators in the United States Senate was my policy views became more moderate and more measured. As a scientist, I think I approached everything, any new information or, any kind of new topic with a degree of objectivity and studying the facts. And I believed strongly coming to Washington that science should drive policy, and the more scientific information we brought to policymakers, the better informed their decisions could be. And I still subscribe to this belief. But in the process of working on the other side of receiving information on Capitol Hill, I could definitely see that there were a lot of factors that drive policy decisions, and it was not always clear cut. Communities had different needs, different challenges they were facing, different struggles, and it really increased my appreciation for those diverse perspectives and for trying to build consensus, find common ground, and work through really difficult problems that did not have easy solutions. So when I decided it was time to get off the Hill, I really wanted to return to this issue of, focus on the issue of climate solutions, but I wanted to do so from a market-driven lens. So I ended up working at the Pew Charitable Trust, which was very active in clean energy policy development from a business and economic perspective and what could drive market signals for clean energy or climate solutions. And at Pew, I was happy to take over management of the Clean Energy Business Network, which was founded by Pew. And we spun out 3 years ago to become an independent organization in our own right and really expand our mission. but we are housed under the parentage of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. And I'm going to let Ruth talk in a few minutes about what that is. So I hope that this background, the reason I'm diving into this is to give you the sense that I think many folks in our industry, in the clean energy industry, and many supporters of the clean energy industry come at this through a passionate, sort of solution-driven lens, and I applaud that, and I applaud all the work you're doing. And I just hope my experience, having been on the receiving end on Capitol Hill of information, and then now kind of working strategically with stakeholders to help them communicate their messages, that I understand that it is a challenge sometimes to work with folks that don't see eye to eye with you on policy solutions. I'm not going to go into this in depth, but with that lens that I sort of brought to the table with leading the Clean Energy Business Network, I'm very pleased with some of the impacts we have seen over the past 3 years since we became an independent organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of but you can see a snapshot of some of that reach here. So I'm going to try to boil this down into 5 simple tips for effective grassroots or grass tops advocacy. Number 1 is know what is your ask. So in a typical meeting with a congressional office, you can expect to get maybe 30 minutes max to meet with the staffer, shorter if you're meeting with the policymaker themselves. And I sat through many meetings when I was on Capitol Hill where I was 25 minutes into the meeting and was not sure why these people had requested the meeting with me. And so it's really important both in making a good impression and not wasting your time to make sure you are clear on what your ask is going into the meeting. Sometimes you're there to discuss a specific bill or policy issue, and sometimes it is much more general education, and that's okay, but be clear about that. So if you're there for general education, come in and say, you know, we are here just for a brief introduction of our companies or our work or our organization today. And the reason we wanted to introduce you is because down the road, we might see some action later in this Congress on the infrastructure bill or tax proposals or et cetera. And we wanted to build a relationship with you now in advance, and then we'll reach out as those things come down the road. Like just kind of set the stage that there will be some ask coming. If it's just introduction, that's great. But there has to be a reason. Why are you bothering to take the time to introduce yourself to these offices? So I always recommend you start the meeting with a thank you for taking the time to meet. We are from X organization, company, whatever, community, and we are here to discuss why. And then turn to all your introductions and your background. Don't inundate the people with your background before they have any idea why you're there to meet with them. My second recommendation is to know your audience. Do some homework in advance and study how your targets talk. What do they talk about? What do they care about? I think Scott made a really good point. You're not going to go in and say to someone in the meeting, I totally fundamentally disagree with you and I'm going to change your mind and the information I'm sharing with you is going to radically alter your views. That's not going to happen. Change takes time and it takes relationship building. So meet your targets where they are. They love oil and coal and gas. Great, that's their starting point. Find a way to relate your industry, your ask to that. So know whether they are really, environmentally minded, care about emissions reductions versus industry economic growth. Know what some of their policy priorities are. Some of them might be unrelated to your topic, but there's a way, if they care about trade or foreign policy, to work that into your talking points. Know their politics, and then know their geographic reach and try to target map your reach as a constituent or business to them. So I just want to give you a quick example of a campaign I've worked on with the waste heat to power industry, which is an efficiency technology. And it's very different from solar, obviously, but I think I'm going to give you a couple of talking points really quickly. If I'm going into a office that cares a lot about emissions, I will say we've made so much progress in the utility sector on reducing emissions, but the industrial sector remains very hard to solve. This technology offers tremendous emissions reductions benefits and turns a waste product, waste heat into a resource, electricity, with zero additional emissions. That's why it qualifies as a Class 1 renewable resource in 20 states. Now, if I'm going to a target that has a heavy oil and gas or industrial economy, and I know that's very important, I might change my talking points. I'll say, this is a terrific opportunity to reduce costs and increase competitiveness of the US manufacturing sector. It has tremendous applications in oil and gas, steel and manufacturing. It can help reshore American manufacturing jobs, and it can provide reliable on-site power. So all of those things are true, but the emphasis changes. My third point is to know your story. And I think that stories that resonate well on a bipartisan basis always involve jobs, economic growth, and energy security and resilience reliability. You can never go wrong with such messages. And I want to just highlight back, if you guys remember, and if you're old enough to remember the Obama-Romney elections, Mitt Romney, infamously said and was lambasted for this a little bit when he said corporations are people too. And I know what he meant by that, which is they employ people, so policies that benefit corporations will help people. And I think it's important to remember when you're going to policymakers that it's all about people. So I know many of you are from smaller businesses or you are individual supporters. Make it about you. Small businesses are one of the shiniest things on Capitol Hill. There's broad support. If you're from a larger corporation or you're an employee of a larger corporation, it's all about workers. So, don't make this the greedy industry ask. It's about workers. It's about small businesses. It's about individuals who benefit. So get your story straight in advance. What are the strengths you can bring that will really capture people's hearts and minds and souls? Talk about the jobs that your company or that this industry provides in your community. Talk about customer benefits, especially if you've got a compelling customer such as a school or hospital. You're helping to provide reliable power or some sort of technology solution. Just make it clear how real human beings are benefiting. Don't make it about the industry. Don't make it about the environment. Even you can a little if you're going to certain offices, but it's really about people. My second to last recommendation is know your assets. Know what are your strengths. Do you have policy strengths within your organization or your business? Do you have a good communications shop? Or do you have strong political relationships? You go to fundraisers, your congressman, leverage those assets. And where you do not have those assets, partner up with folks who do. So, we have found it really useful to work with a combination of right-leaning, left-leaning, think tank, all sorts of groups that have relationships with key policymakers and can help us get our foot in the door and get, the senior level official on the site tour or in the meeting, or get their view. Or, we work on a lot of communications products, and sometimes we team up with folks that really have great resources to bear to get those stories told. And then finally, know your opportunities. And I think you need to have both an ongoing offensive strategy and sort of know what are your ongoing asks for like broader campaigns and longer term goals, but also follow the developments and be reactive or defensive when opportunities or challenges present themselves. So for example, in our organization, we have longer term strategic goals and ongoing efforts on things such as appropriations, tax policy, regularly recurring infrastructure bills like the Farm Bill or the Transportation Bill. But then we also react to opportunities that present themselves or sometimes challenges. So for example, right now, we spent a lot of time looking at the COVID-19 impact on the small businesses in this country and thinking through policy solutions to weather that. We have to be prepared for these kinds of situations. So just to put it all together, there's kind of a cyclical process, I think, where you have to gear up your communications, your advocacy, bring that into your meetings on Capitol Hill, follow up on those meetings with thank yous and relationship building with those offices, think through how can you pepper in media outreach in the states and districts that you're targeting throughout your campaign, partner up with others that can help you with that follow-up. And so just kind of build all of these pieces into the cycle of your efforts. So thank you again for offering the opportunity to talk about these campaigning strategies today. And I've put our organization's website if you'd like to learn more and get to know us better.
Great presentation, Lynn. I actually, to build on a couple of comments, when I go in to meet a member of Congress, I'll go on the website of the congressman or senator and read their press releases or their floor statement. And then when you walk in, one of the first things after what you follow, Lynn says, "I'm here to talk about this, and this is why this is what I want to talk to you about." The next thing I say is, I just read your floor statement or your press release, last month on blah, and it was brilliant. And this line you said, blah, 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 is exactly what I want to talk about. Well, it's very hard for them to hate you when you just said they're brilliant and you picked up on something they said and said, "I'm coming in with it." So that's one tactic.
So
the
true.
other one I love to do is I'll try to, if they're, let's say, an oil and gas senator or congressman, I'll get some pictures of renewable solar, wind, renewable energy on oil and gas projects in the state or the county. And I'll actually hand pictures starting right off after I introduce myself on there, saying, I don't know how much you've seen our stuff in your county or with the industry, but our industry's selling like crazy. Here are a couple of projects. Or another way to do it is I check on who's there on their campaign committees. They're always involved in renewable energy efficiency. And I go, it just happens to know. And it's so exciting to know that two of you guys on the campaign committee, blah, 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 are principals in these renewable energy companies or investors. And they actually, half the time, they don't know that. And they like, whoa, really? And
the policy staff are kind of firewalled from that. So that can be tricky, but
not if you're glad to know, that people who are working to get you elected are in our community as well. And I think that's the point, is to be able to tie in a real connection. So our next speaker and presenter is Ruth McCormick, and she handles sort of the policy and legislative affairs for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. I was one of the co-founders of this nonprofit, and I'm on the board. And Ruth has been a real disciplined player in how she brokers messaging to Capitol Hill. And there is her PowerPoint and picture, excellent. Also, sadly, without a beard, but a really excellent professional. So Ruth, take it over.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm sorry I don't have my picture in the corner of your Zoom session, but you do have it here on the first PowerPoint slide. So hopefully you'll be able to capture that image and know who's speaking to you. But thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Like Lynn and Scott have both said, I think much of what I will tell you is very similar, because as you can see from this picture, I've been in this line of work for a long time. So I have a lot of years of experience in dealing with policymakers and stakeholders in advocacy issues. So similar to Lynn, I wanted to spend a little bit of time to share with you a bit about my own background so that you understand my perspective. I'll talk a little bit about the organization for which I work and what our orientation is to the issues, and then spend some time to share with you some of my experience over all of the years I've been doing this, and hopefully give you some tips on how to make your own advocacy effective. So I have worked for the Business Council for Sustainable Energy for over 10 years. I'll get into the orientation of the Business Council in a little bit. But prior to that, I worked for another industry organization working on issues affecting the Western United States, environmental issues of all types, for about 13 years. And prior to that, I worked on Capitol Hill. And while there, I had the opportunity of working with a member who was on the House Energy and Commerce Committee at the time when Congress was enacting the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. So again, you can tell I've been doing this for a long time, but the Clean Air Act amendments was a landmark piece of legislation. It gave me a lot of experience in how the policymaking process works and kind of how stakeholder engagement on Capitol Hill works best. But it was also after I left the Hill, when I went to go work for an industry organization working on implementation of the Clean Air Act, that I really saw kind of the rubber meet the road. And I was able to work on a commission that was established from the Clean Air Act amendments that was addressing visual air quality in the Grand Canyon and the other national parks and wilderness areas on the Colorado Plateau. And it was through that process where I was engaged with stakeholders of all types, from industry to governors, to federal land managers, to Native American tribes, to environmental organizations, and we were all tasked with coming together with consensus recommendations on how to improve and protect air quality in the Grand Canyon. And for that reason, I also came to the same conclusions that Lynn has when it comes to respect to working together and finding solutions with a very diverse group of stakeholders who don't necessarily have your same perspective and share your same views. So the organization that I'm with now is the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. We are the voice of U.S. clean energy industries here in Washington. We include sectors from the renewable energy sector, the energy efficiency sector, and natural gas. We tend to be the larger companies, and we're a sister organization to the Clean Energy Business Network. We include trade associations for many of these industries. I have a slide that shows our members so you can get a view of the diverse set of our industries. The purpose of our organization is to advocate for policies that promote clean, efficient, and sustainable energy products, technologies, and services. So to this end, I manage the federal and state outreach, and I'm working on a regular basis with members of Congress to advocate for market-based solutions to deploy clean energy technologies from across the various sectors, and to, in the process, improve our energy resilience and address climate change and improve economics across the country. This is the set of industries and businesses that are members of the Business Council. So it's a very diverse group of businesses from all of the sectors that I mentioned: energy efficiency, renewable, and natural gas, as well as the associations that represent many of the smaller businesses from within those sectors. And our orientation on the federal policy front, right now, we are focused on many of those issues that are ongoing and recurrent, that are always there, that are always opportunities for deploying these clean energy technologies. So similar to what Lynn was saying, the work that we do addresses appropriations, for example, which is something that has to be done every year. That's like a must do every year that Congress has to enact. And there are opportunities for funding in the different federal programs addressing clean energy. And we're involved in many of those areas and looking to get funding for the research and development and deployment of clean energy technologies through this annual federal appropriations process. We work together collectively and collaboratively as businesses, where we get together on a weekly basis and we learn from each other about the work that the different industries are doing, so that we can be better informed about what our associates and colleagues are doing in various areas, so that we kind of know what the big picture is, and we stay on top of what legislative developments are by having congressional staff join us at our weekly meetings to share with us legislative updates on the work that they're doing and how things are progressing with various pieces of legislation. We have also been doing outreach, and we've been partnering with the Clean Energy Business Network to be more do more of the virtual outreach that we're all having to do now in light of COVID-19, where we have been hosting webinars and we invite guest speakers and panelists to talk about relevant issues that are important and that are ongoing in the clean energy sector. One of the things that we've also had to do to adapt our work this year in a very sudden way, as we've been dealing with this pandemic, is to redirect some of our focus on the COVID-19 response and then the ensuing economic recovery that we are facing and the need to revive our economy. Our hope is to use clean energy technologies to help stimulate some of that economic recovery. So we have been collecting from all of our members the ideas that they have for COVID-19 response measures as well as economic recovery measures, so that when Congress is ready to act on the next response or economic recovery measure, we can help inform the development of that legislation and help to shape it with these ideas that we know have been successful. Clean energy industries have been growing over the past decade, and the Business Council has engaged in an effort where we produce a report every year that has showcased the growth of these sectors, so that we know that from past history that these clean energy industries have driven economic growth, and with the right policy levers, they can be positioned to do the same thing now that we are in need of economic recovery as a result of this pandemic. We also have focused a great deal on resilience, where we have established a subgroup of our members to address this topic and looking at ways in which, as Congress is addressing infrastructure or even the response after hurricanes or natural disasters, what we can do to be better prepared in this situation so that our communities and our states are more resilient, and that we can leverage federal dollars to help the communities as they're addressing these challenges. Congress is very focused right now on all of these issues, so you might keep in mind as you are doing your own advocacy on the issues that you care about, that Congress is very focused on these issues and these challenges that are presented by COVID-19, and in many cases they're really struggling with the best ways in which to approach the situation, not really knowing from day to day what may develop and what needs to be done. So they're learning in very real time how to respond. So it's our position to be there to help them as they're trying to work through some of this and have recommendations and relationships with offices so that we can be a resource to them as they're trying to address these issues. So right now I've kind of listed out the issues that are really at the forefront of federal action right now. So when you do reach out to offices, recognizing that this is where they're spending much of their time to think about the work that they need to do. The federal budget is an ongoing issue. They're really beginning their work right now over the summer to mark up appropriations bills. So there's a lot of focus and effort. And again, these are must-pass pieces of legislation. So this is one of the things that Congress actually has to do. They're required by the Constitution to appropriate the funds, and they are very focused on this. And this is the time that they're looking at this. The COVID-19 response and economic recovery just overlays all of that. And in many cases, as I said, they're learning in real time what needs to be done and making decisions. And so they're interested in getting ideas from stakeholders about what might be appropriate in helping the economy to recover. I would say that there was a hearing last week that the president of our organization was invited to testify at with the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And it was all about the impacts of COVID-19 on the energy sector. Over on the House side, in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, on the very same day, they had a hearing on that very same topic. So they're looking at what the impact is on the energy sector, and they're very hungry for ideas on how to help this sector recover, because it does affect not only the industries, but people who consume energy, which is virtually every American. So they're very interested in ideas that can help address these challenges. And they're struggling with that, and they're looking for resources such as yours to be able to help them to figure out the next steps. And of course, along with that, there's the economic recovery piece. Right now, the House is focused on a major infrastructure package, which incorporates things from surface transportation, tax elements, energy, and others. So it's a very broad piece of legislation because they're looking at infrastructure as a way of addressing the economic crisis. Police reform is not an issue that we are involved in, but it's also something that's very much at the forefront, with action occurring even this week in the Senate on that, and on the House too. So these are kind of the big picture issues as you go into offices that many of them are focused on. So if they're not specifically familiar with issues that you're raising, you just might want to keep in mind that we're working in a really strange time where there's these huge challenges that no one has ever faced before, and they're also working in a very different environment, and everyone's trying to feel their way in how to make it work. So to that end, the way that we approach people on the Hill is very different from what we have typically done, where you have in-person meetings and you're able to sit across the table from them and kind of have some give and take from them. We're all doing this in kind of a different environment. That being said, some of the basics that go into meeting with congressional staff really never change. And some of those are like, how do you fit into their congressional priorities? Some of those that I've mentioned, the COVID-19, the jobs, economic recovery. If you can help them make those connections, that can be very important. You are part of the solution. Clean energy industries can really help with the economic recovery challenges that we are facing as a nation. And as I described before, this is a sector where there has been economic growth over the past decade. So history has shown that this is an area where Congress could and should focus some attention, because it can help to bring about economic recovery and job growth. It's also important to build those relationships so that staff can recognize you as a source of trusted information. And this does take time. There's a lot of relationship building that goes into having congressional staff know you and feel that they can go out to you and reach out for information that they might need, even if it's not at the time of your meeting, to be able to establish those relationships so that they can come back to you at a later time to get information that will help them address whatever the situation at hand may be. And as Scott was saying, it's really important to know your audience and be familiar with who it is that you're addressing. And I would have to say that this is one of my favorite parts of the job. When I go in to meet with a congressional office, or when I hear someone make a statement, I love to go in and look at a biography of them. And we have resources that we use that we are able to identify email addresses, for example, for the appropriate staff person that we need to reach out to. And there are biographies associated with these resource pages on members of Congress. And I really love to read their biographies and find out, who are these people? You know, where did they grow up? What was their family situation like? Where did they go to school? What has their professional career been? And what motivates them? What drives them? So I want to know who these people are. And I think that it helps to establish those relationships. I think for me to share with them a little bit about myself, but also to be aware that we have very diverse people in our country, and they don't all see the world the way that we see it. And when I read biographies, many times I will say to myself, well, I totally understand why you feel the way you do, because this is the background and perspective that you've had, which may not be the same as mine, but I can appreciate those differences because I've taken the time to learn a little bit about the person who is holding that office or the staff that I'm dealing with. So I think knowing a little bit about your audience can be really informative for you, as well as helping them to appreciate the fact that you do know a little bit about them and that you're familiar with them. One of the things that you won't get in this environment, because you are not doing in-person meetings the way one would typically do on Capitol Hill, when you are able to do that in person, it's really interesting to go into a congressional office. And for me, just to even see what kind of artifacts or pictures and other things that they have in their office. How do they have it decorated? Because it's like taking a tour of the country without ever leaving Capitol Hill, because there's a little bit about that member of Congress and the area that they represent that you can capture just by seeing their surroundings. In addition to that, and Lynn mentioned some of these sort of traditionals that you will need as you meet with offices, and this does not change even though we're working in this virtual format, but to have those one or two asks and to have that laid out so it's very clear up front what it is that you want from them. We would like you to co-sponsor this bill. We want you to sign this letter. We want you to support this bill, and this is why. But to make it very clear, these are very busy people that you're meeting with, and I think the current circumstances have even made that more challenging than usual. I've talked to staff, they say they get hundreds of emails a day. I know that I get overwhelmed with emails and it gets confusing and it's hard to keep on track of it. For them, I think it's even worse because they've got so many people reaching out to them wanting things, that for them to be able to cull through all those emails and to be able to hone in on what they're being asked is a real big challenge. So I've been told that if you send something to a Hill staff and you don't get a response from them, send it again. Sometimes what I will do is I will forward the email that I sent to them before, and I will change the subject line, and I will say, following up on this thing that I asked you about before. And so that there's a record that I've tried to reach out to you. I haven't heard back. I'm still interested in, being able to connect with you and want to send you this piece of information, to just recognize that they're really overwhelmed at this point. And then with whatever kind of materials you have, obviously you'll be sending those electronically, whereas in the past you may have had a paper leave behind, is the way we term it. I was finding that even before, or at the very beginning of the stay-at-home orders, we were doing some meetings up on Capitol Hill. We were supposed to be meeting in person, and at the time, staff were saying, you know what, we're just going to do these by phone. We don't want to meet with people. We want to keep things socially distant. And there was one staffer who was asking that any materials that we have be sent electronically, because she said what she has to do with them anyway is she would have to scan a paper copy so that she would have it in her computer. So I'm thinking for all of us that this is something that's going to change going forward. We're not going to have those paper leave behinds. I think people want to have the electronic documents. And I'm seeing Scott, so I probably need to wrap up here pretty quick. I just want to really point out that, again, this virtual world that we're in has changed things for everybody. It's probably made for some more challenges, but also created opportunities to connect with audiences. And then I included a quote in here from Ernest Hemingway, who talked about the importance of listening to people. You have a lot of answers, but other people have a perspective that you might want to pick up on, so you know how to reach out to them. And Ernest Hemingway had made the point that he really has learned a lot in his life from listening to others, and that people generally don't take the time to listen, and how critically important that is. So I always like to ask staff, tell me what you're working on. Tell me how you see this piece of legislation moving. What do you see the next steps? And I think you can learn a lot that will help inform the work that you do. So with that, I will close, and thank you for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back to you, Scott.
Thank you so much. Great presentation, Ruth. It reminded me also that when I'm reading about the member of Congress or meeting with the staff, if the member of Congress supported or signed on to anything that's even tangentially related, I mean, it could be saving a bird or saving some parkland, I would, after I introduce myself and say what I'm for, I would say immediately, wow, I just saw 2 weeks ago you saved this park, or you saved this bird, or you saved it. And that's amazing. I'm really proud of you. And there's nothing like complimenting a member of Congress. They beam. and then I do what I mentioned earlier. I read something they said, and I'm relating my meeting to them. I also wanted to give you a 1-minute story, is that when I started running the Solar Industries Association, which I ran again for 15 years, I used to leave a lot of material and studies and everything else. And of course, the member of Congress would never take them, and they'd hand it to an aide who already doesn't, has a 4-foot pile of stuff they haven't filed anyway, and it goes on the floor on top of the file cabinet. And then I started leaving little 3-pagers, and then I moved to 1-pagers. And in the last 3 or 4 years, I brought a 2-by-3-foot fiberboard picture. And it would be a picture maybe of a manufacturing plant in their district or state, or a installation near there, or something that related to what they're interested in talking about. If they're in the military, I do a lot of military stuff. I would show something on a military base, and I would put it on the chair next to me. And I say, don't look at that yet. And I would give them a little minute. Of course they would. And I go, okay, since that's what you're interested in. And I would show them the picture. And it was actually a very moving experience for them, because most of the folks, unless they're really advocates and proponents for what we're for, have never seen an installation of most of the technologies we're talking about. And they'll always ask some questions. And I have been told many times by many that members of Congress that to them was the most important thing. Because we're talking about a lot of things that people have never seen. We think they see it because we're in the field, but they haven't. So I know we have some questions from the audience, but I'm going to do as moderator, I always have the right to do the first question. And to both Lynn and Ruth, it's the same question here, is I'd sort of like to know, or have a very short response of what you saw, a real thing for a policymaker, an event where it went terribly wrong.
Wait, I lost half the question. Can you repeat it?
Okay, I'll redo it again. All right, so
couldn't hear
I
you for a
wanted
second.
to know, I have a very loud voice too, so my daughter says I don't even need a cell phone to talk to her in California. But anyway, so the question is, I want you to relate an actual event dealing with a policymaker at any level where you actually saw something go wrong. Somebody did something, or something that just really backfired. Because I really think to understand not only the good things, but I really would like to see if any of you have a story you can pull out of your head of your experience where something has gone wrong. It doesn't have to be major, but anything come to mind, either Lynn or Ruth?
I can think of one that happened just recently, and I wouldn't say that something went really wrong, but I think it just is a reflection of the world that we're working in now, where we cannot do in-person meetings. So I was in a meeting that was being organized by a group of people who were focused on a tax issue, and they were meeting with a staff person from an office of a member of the Senate Finance Committee. So someone who was very familiar with this topic, very sympathetic to the issues that we were talking about, but she just was not really engaged. She seemed kind of bored throughout the conversation, because the people who were doing the presentation, they all kind of ran through their spiel to explain what the issues were, who they were, why they cared. And it was late in the day. It was like a 4 o'clock in the afternoon conference call, which is not unusual. I mean, many times staff people will work late. Right now, the situation is very different. I've had staff people say that they're working at all hours of the night, because for them, some of them have young children at home, that they're responsible for childcare duties. So they're actually turning to their work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So, those are kind of situations that staff people are just having to deal with. And I think understanding that these are challenges, and again, you don't have the opportunity to pick up on the social cues that you do when you're meeting with someone in person. I used to have people say that when they were on the Hill, when they wanted to cut a meeting short, they would look at their watch to kind of give the person on the other side the idea that, hey, we got to go. I only have so much time to spend with you. So not having the ability to pick up on those social cues can just present challenges. But I think also, in light of the experience that I had recently with this staffer who just seemed kind of bored, I think people need to understand there might be reasons for that, and you just need to wrap up and, you know, follow up with them later, send an email, just kind of be respectful of the challenges that people are experiencing, because they're many and they're different.
Ruth, that's why you're more skilled than I am. I would sit down and they would look at their watch immediately. You know, it just was a downer right there. Lynn?
Are they looking at their watch, or are they looking at the poster, Scott? Which is it?
No,
Where do they start?
was looking at their watch. Yeah, no question about it.
I actually was going to say something similar. I can't think of anything dramatically bad, and I know
Damn,
I
was
had
looking for
some
a
dramatically.
thing, you know. Okay.
Well, I know there were dramatically bad meetings when I was with the senator. It's been a minute, so I don't remember. Usually it was on my end, like I was like horribly embarrassed by something that went wrong, you know, where I was like, why did we just say that? But, you know, I think I want to echo what Ruth said about remembering the people you're meeting with are human beings. And I feel like even on video, pick up with social cues. You can pick up with social cues and kind of, you know, tell if they're engaged or not. But I guess we've had a bunch of fly-ins, and I've had some of our members, I think, similar to what Ruth has said, like they're cornering the staff in the hallways, and they're like, they won't let them go, and they won't just move on. And I think sometimes it's like, know when the person is done with you and move on is very important. So yeah, try to pick up on the social cues. And as Ruth said, you know, like even in a non-COVID world, these folks are having 10 meetings a day. They start their work, their like paperwork, sitting, writing memos and things at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. So be sympathetic to them and try to get your message across pretty quickly.
Excellent. Carly, do you want to get questions from the audience here for us?
Yeah, we got one question here from a Kaya. What was an example of someone in government changing their stance on an issue?
Cool question.
Yeah.
Ruth, you want that?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can think of an example of someone changing, but you know, again, I come from a different perspective probably than many of you. I worked for a member of Congress who was proud to say he was one of the most conservative members of Congress at the time. I don't know that I necessarily shared all of his political views. I didn't really even know when I was 22 years old what I thought in many cases. But I have always had the perspective that you need to talk to people of all types, and you don't know your own argument till you know the other side of the argument as well. Just as when you go into a debate, you don't know your own side of the argument till you know what the other side is going to say. And we know we're all different. I think we're experiencing that even more now as a nation. I think it's really coming to the forefront that we're very different, and there are needs, and everybody deserves to be heard. And I don't think that you're going to change somebody's mind until you start kind of even with the small parts, just listening to them, hearing their perspective. Yeah, I mean, I have lots of examples of things where, I mean, I could go into more detail. I don't want to necessarily take the time. If somebody would like to talk a little bit more offline, I'd be happy to share some of those views. But I mean, some of the things I picked up, for example, when Congress was enacting the tax reform legislation from a couple of years ago, you know, being able to listen in to some of the markups that were being held. And again, learning about the policymakers and their backgrounds really gave me an appreciation and an understanding for where they were on the issues.
Yeah, and I think to Ruth's point about you know, sort of communicating with everyone, even if they have very different views from you. I don't know if this is exactly changing your views. I think it's going to be hard to fundamentally change a person's views. So instead, it's more like, how do you take the views they have and shift them, make it safe for them to care about the things you care about too, in a weird way. Like, so, you know, you know, for example, a lot of the clean energy tax bills or, you know, legislation that we have lobbied on, we've gotten really broad bipartisan support for some of these proposals. And sometimes from offices where clean energy, you know, isn't maybe historically a priority, but by sort of taking the industries that are key in those states and districts and showcasing examples. Like, I have never walked around with a giant poster like Scott. That's pretty funny. I thought that was the great, you know, like, that will catch attention. But, you know, we do basically come in and give those examples of those projects or a way to kind of tie it back home. And we've seen a lot of folks who maybe weren't historic clean energy supporters start signing on to bills. I will give a couple examples of, unrelating to energy, when I was on the Hill where, you know, I was working with Senator Boxer, and a couple of things that came up. One was we were working on the California water crisis and endangered species, and it was, you know, it's like such a horrible situation with the constant drought and just the way the infrastructure is there. And there were times I had to sort of talk her into slightly softening her environmental position, not because I felt like, you know, it wasn't valid or anything, but I was like, this is the reality on the ground, and we're going to lose this much headway unless we give a little and try to come up with a pragmatic solution. Similarly, I worked on some transportation safety things for her where sometimes I had to sort of be negotiating with industry and come back and say, look, this is a really good deal. We should take this deal, you know? And so I did see her change her mind sometimes, or, you know, just sort of recognize that there were complexities to these issues and we had to find imperfect solutions that accommodated what was happening on the ground.
I actually have a very good story on that. Last year in the defense authorization bill, I was called by some of the groups because this was in the Senate, and of course controlled by the Republicans, and I do a lot of projects on military bases and teach seminars at National Defense University at Fort McNair in Washington, D.C., so they felt that even with the beard, I would be good, helpful up there. And what I did was I went up there and I did not, they wanted to address climate change. And I didn't, you know, I knew those Republicans would not vote with anything with the word climate change. So I did a series.
Although this has changed, Scott.
Has some, but not last year. It didn't, and not in the military. And so I talked about resiliency and how do you deal with these bases on energy reliability and resiliency. And we got very, very strong language. I mean, extremely powerful language that talks about ocean surges and heat waves and hurricanes and, you know, all the things we talk about in our litany on global warming and increasing greenhouse gases, but never mentioned but resiliency and military resiliency, and it was exactly what we wanted. So the point being is terminology matters. And if somebody can't say something, and by the way, the Dems have the same problems on certain issues, they can't say something, well, then you just change the terminology to get them to feel comfortable to come on board. Our job is not to get them to change their view. Our job is to get them to contort to our view in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So that's my story.
Exactly.
Well, and if I could,
like
I would
someone's
just
going to support. Go ahead, Ruth. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would not underestimate the value of a site visit or, for example, what you mentioned, Scott, a photograph of a project, because I don't think you can assume that everybody knows everything that you know. They don't. I think of this a lot with some of our members, like from the fuel cell industry. They go into a meeting and they expect that everybody knows what they're talking about. I don't think a lot of people know what the heck a fuel cell is and the chemistry involved in it and the technology and what it does. And I just think that if you site visits, when you're able to do those in person, are extremely valuable and have been a tool that have been used for a very long time, where you invite staff out to see a project so they can kind of touch it and feel it and see what it does. And in this world where you can't do that now, I still think that we can get creative and maybe have a little video clip, not a long one, because you don't want to bore people. You want them to pay attention to it, but show them what these things look like. I think use technology to our advantage to reach out to a different audience and to educate. I think a lot of people have a bad view of what a lobbyist is, but in my mind, they're educators, because none of us know everything, and that's our job, is to educate people about the things that we are doing and things that we care about.
And that's so important, the tours and real world. My best story on that is we have a renewable energy efficient caucus in the House and Senate, and I needed at a time to get a Republican to be the co-chairman, and I had my sights on this Republican congressman, very conservative wing of the party from Arizona. And I met with him, and all my ask was, I want you to visit one of these 4 companies. And once a week, I would nag his scheduling secretary to do that. And finally, she calls me up and says, he's on a trip. I got him to go to this company. And he goes. And I get a call from him at my home on the weekend. And he said, well, I did it because you're annoying. But he said, I went to this company and I expected to meet some guys with Birkenstocks and, and shorts and Hawaii t-shirts and big beards like yours, and go and see 6 people, putting up a solar panel. And he went to a company I'm not going to mention where they had 180 people working on deployable solar battery systems. And he said, first of all, I never knew it was in my district. Secondly, I never knew that they were this big. Third, they're doing international markets, and I'm really interested in international, and I really want to drive that. And I would be so honored to be co-chairman. And when he came on, he changed the dialogue with some of the other conservative Republicans, because he said, look, these are employing people in my district. What the hell are you afraid of? That's what we're supposed to be about. So touching, I could have told him all about it, and he, and he probably wouldn't understand it, even with maybe my picture on the chair. But seeing it and talking to people who are doing it is very, very critical. So I'm sort of amplifying what Ruth says. Carly, next question.
Yeah, George Reynoldson is asking, do any of you have experience with the Climate Solutions Caucus? If so, might they become an important source to influence other Senate and House members in favor of policies that benefit clean energy business interests?
Who wants to go first? I mean, I can address that. Yes, I am familiar with the Climate Solutions Caucus. We have worked with them closely in the past. My sense is they've lost some of their leadership in the previous election, and it's not really been very active in this Congress. Of course, some of that could be a result of kind of COVID-19 being the focus that everybody is, concerned about. Yeah. But I don't know if that could change. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work, and there's other conservative organizations that are trying to amplify conservative voices. I know that Lynn works closely with a number of them, but to try to help the conservative members of Congress to kind of reach out and be more vocal on these issues. So I don't know, Lynn, if you have more that you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's, I think it was really a loss, like in the last election, we lost some of the conservative leaders on climate. Like everybody in the middle kind of was lost, and we had a much more polarized sort of House emerge. And so a lot of the leaders in the Climate Solutions Caucus in the House side, as Ruth mentioned, have been lost. However, I'm actually pretty excited to see the progress we're seeing on the Senate side, in the Climate Caucus on the Senate side. Again, like I don't really know, there's not very specific policies coming out, but there are some proposals out there. But I feel like I saw a big change over the past year and a half in terms of how bipartisan it is and okay it is to talk about climate change, and how it's actually becoming sort of a political liability to not have some sort of plan for addressing climate change. And we see voters are demanding that, young people are demanding that. So we saw folks like Senator Braun and Senator Romney, step up and say, we need to, like they were the first two to make a jump and say, we need to have a bipartisan climate caucus in the Senate. And it's always so hard for either side of the aisle to be the first to take the leap. It's kind of like, those of you who've built projects, you've probably heard from customers, I want to be your fourth or fifth customer. I don't want to be your first. And it's the same thing. I think the experience of policymakers, it's hard for them to put themselves at risk and go out on a limb. So I've been really excited to see, at least there's growing interest and awareness. So even if there's not a lot of specific bipartisan policies, and there are some, but there's been some briefings and such, some joint actions. I just think the fact that we do see growing bipartisan support in Congress and in voters for climate change is really a big step.
And adding to what Lynn just said, I mean, aside from the caucuses, there have been, Republican members of Congress who have been willing to step out. In fact, right before the stay-at-home orders, Kevin McCarthy on the House side, the House Minority Leader, was ready to release the Republicans' package on clean energy and climate change. Because again, I do think, as Lynn said, that the Republicans are acknowledging or seeing that they need to have a platform on this topic. So that happened, but it got sidelined because of COVID-19. Again, this is really a kind of a pressing priority right now for Congress, and everything else has kind of been set aside. So there are those initiatives. I would also say, for example, in different pieces of legislation, there are climate change is incorporated in a way that it hasn't been previously. So for example, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee has reported out its surface transportation bill, and they did that months ago. And there is a climate change title in that surface transportation bill, the first time ever. And that is chaired by Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, a big coal state. So, it was a bipartisan initiative, and it looks at alternative fuel and refueling infrastructure. And so, there are some of those movements underway.
Yeah.
I have kind of a question for you guys. I know this is more of a recent movement, but with the racial justices going on, Black Lives Matter movement, are we seeing anything that's been built into the climate change or clean energy bills that's kind of addressing environmental justices, or has this been built into bills previously, or more so now versus then?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen a lot built into legislation yet, but I think, there's some. I mean, Scott, you might want to talk. There's some things kind of like the Green New Deal type stuff. You want to talk about some of what was existing before all this?
Well, I actually want to point out, I'm not seeing much on the federal level yet, but I am seeing it on the state and local level. And you're seeing more bills on community renewables, on getting renewables to underserved communities. I'm starting to see more.
What are some of the states where you're seeing that, Scott?
Colorado, Minnesota, the Southeast starting to do more. I'm involved in some projects on low-income housing where the language has come in on getting more renewables and efficiency for stabilizing electricity rates, for example. So I think, and COVID is driving some of this, frankly, as well as Black Lives Matter, that the inequities are starting to come up, and many of us have been involved in this for a long time. And when you really deal with it and look at a poor person's income, most of it goes for four things. It goes for rent, it goes for food, it goes for gasoline, and then it goes for electric and natural gas payments. And then they're done. There's no more money left. And if any of those rise, that's it. They're out. And so these issues are becoming more and more important, of course, and the inequities are being highlighted as they should. So a part of us needs to not only recognize that and figure out how we build into it, but also build in from different political directions. You know, that there are private sector solutions to solve some of these problems if the right tools are given at the federal, state, and local levels. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I'm seeing it more at the state and local level. I'm not actually seeing too much on the Fed level, other than there's some bills that are being sort of thrown out a little bit in concept, but I don't think they're going to go anywhere.
Right.
But I mean, I think it's fair because we haven't actually had an economic stimulus package yet. We've just had patchwork kind of. So I do think there's an opportunity to see more on this in the federal level. And the one thing I see that I find personally encouraging is this has been something I've always cared a lot about, but I feel like now a lot of folks who work in the climate movement or environmental movement are sort of owning up the fact that we need to better align ourselves with the social justice movement and make that a higher priority, and recognize that, like, you know, I was actually on a call last night where our speaker said something to the effect of addressing climate change is about people. It's about making people's lives better and protecting this planet so we can live here. And so is social justice. And I think the kinds of people who care about clean energy and climate action care about making this world a better place. And so I do think we need to think strategically and, like, look at our own industry and look how lack of diversity we have, you know, what a lack of diversity we have. So I feel like there's more maybe awareness and brewing action within the clean energy industry. And I know on Congress, I mean, there were certain proposals like Green New Deal that were trying to marry various social issues with climate solutions. And a lot of those are frankly dead on arrival, especially with like some of the labor provisions. But there are a lot of workforce development bills that have been introduced. And I think one of the things I'm trying to do now as we work on or respond to legislation is view it and screen it through a lens of, could there be workforce development or equity issues built into this legislation? Could there be, like, you know, provisions built into this legislation that could address some of these issues? And I feel like if we get to the point where we see a really, you know, robust economic recovery package come together, there could be some opportunities to actually advance that. So I don't know, Ruth, do you have anything you would add to this? Yeah.
I do have a couple of comments. One is that internally within our organization, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, we actually have a fellow who is working with us over the summer months, who is looking specifically at the various workforce development proposals that are in legislation so that we can better familiarize ourselves with what is being done and what is said. From a personal standpoint, the advice that I think is best on this topic is one done at a personal level. And this comes again from my own perspective. It comes from things that I'm hearing and seeing even recently. But I think it's up to us to make changes, and we shouldn't wait for some piece of federal legislation to make that. I mean, I have had from kind of my own faith-based circles been told, reach out to someone from a different race this week. You know, making those personal connections with people. I mean, I have a golden opportunity to do this because I have had children in a very diverse public school system, the last of whom has just graduated from high school. And I've never lacked for opportunities to do that. That may change now that he's no longer in high school. But I think that it's incumbent upon each of us individually to make the change. Don't wait for somebody else to do something grand.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you think this reform would be better approached in the short term from like bottom up, like starting at the local level, building in social justice into like the reform at like the local level, and then kind of waiting on doing federal later on, kind of like that plan?
I think we have to be the change, personally.
I think it's a mix too. And it's like, you know, we individually, I think Ruth has such a great point. Like, we individually have to be the change, but then also as for folks that like us who are working in policy, like I think part of what we could see, and I think this could be some of the approach of the economic recovery, but also social justice, is federal assistance or signals that help state and local governments develop their own solutions. And so, for example, you know, with the COVID-19 response, one of the programs I've said I think could have a lot of potential if we ever get to some supplemental appropriations or stimulus package, could be the state energy program, like saying, states, go build what you need, you know, to help rebuild your economy. And I think similarly on this front, like there could be sort of, whether it's like money aid or sort of guidance, I think it's up to us, those of us working at the federal level, to think through what are ways we can help provide the right signals or right information to states to help them develop their own solutions.
Yeah, and to add on that, I spent a lot of time going to the different federal agencies. Department of Homeland Security has a state and local government grants program. Department of Agriculture does. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, does. So looking at all these different agencies that have state and local programs that push money to states and local, energy and resiliency is all part of it. And in some cases, environment, EPA has a state program as well, is to get our kinds of solutions, whether it's low-income housing resiliency or infrastructure resiliency or whatever. Food production resiliency has been a big issue with COVID, and I've been getting calls at you all the time of seeing how we put language in or open up these programs a little more bullishly so they can be accessed by state and local governments to help get their particular needs or particular sectors dealt with. And we need to be, I think, a lot more sophisticated about it and organized around it, because each of these agency programs have their own constituencies. And some of them really want our stuff, but never even thought about it. So there's a great opportunity there.
Yeah.
Carly, anything else? Are we all done?
Yeah, I think, yeah, unless you guys have any final comments, those were all the questions.
I will allow, as moderator, two very tiny, 1 to 2 minute comments of our presenters. This time I'm going to go the other way around. Ruth, do you have anything to say? Tie it up?
Great experience here. You guys have done a great job. I can't see our audience, so I can't really address you specifically, but I just admire you for your work and your willingness to try to do this. You've got important work to do, and I applaud you for that.
And Lynn?
Yeah, I think just similarly, I thank the audience for your efforts to make your voices heard with policymakers. I think, as both Scott and Ruth pointed out, bringing that human face to climate change or to clean energy, and bringing policymakers to see your project, whether that is in person or I think we can do this a lot virtually, allowing people to really see the human story and to see and touch projects and really experience the reality of what's happening on the ground is crucial. The only way we're going to get broad support for clean energy and climate solutions is by really humanizing those and making them accessible. So thank you for offering me the opportunity to participate in this conference, and thank you to everyone for the work that you're doing to address climate change.
Well, I want to thank you both for you're both impressive professionals and great people. And thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to be part of this conference. And of course, Carly and ACES, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who attended this session. And you'll be seeing more. Take care.
Thank
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.